Bible says that He's going to appear unto those that are looking for His glorious appearing. And I believe that wholeheartedly. Believe that we need to keep our attention and our eyes upon heaven. And one of these days, He will return. And those of us who have been faithful will return and or go with Him to a wonderful place. And that is called heaven, of course. I think most of us know that, but just throw that out there. You can be turning tonight to Daniel chapter number 6. Daniel chapter number 6. And appreciate the testimonies that we've heard tonight and the singing and the songs. And appreciate Brother Crane. Just good to see him. He's acting like Brother Crane. I don't know if anybody else thinks that or not, but just good to see him have a little bit of that pep in the step. And good to be in service. Amen. Here this evening. I'd like to help us tonight, and felt as if the Lord began to deal with my heart about this a few days ago, and tried to study a few things out and get these down. And let's press in tonight. Is that all right? Let's all just press in and allow the Lord to help us. Daniel chapter number 6. Daniel chapter 6, verse 10. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into the house, his house, and his windows being open in his chamber towards Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed, and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. Skip down to verse number 16. Then the king commanded, they brought Daniel, cast him into the den of lions. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, thy God whom thou servest continually, He will deliver thee. And a stone was brought, laid upon the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet, and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and a sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning, and went in haste into the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? Then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever. My God hath sent His angel, and hath shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me, for as much as before him innocency was found in me, and also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. Then was the king exceeding glad for him, commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no manner of hurt was found upon him, because he believed in his God. I'd like to preach tonight, if the Lord would help us for just a while, on the view. The view. So many times, I've been guilty of this, but so many times when we read these biblical stories, we have a tendency to understand and or at least the knowledge of how the story is going to end. Most all of us, once again, can look in Daniel, and we begin to read in the first chapter, and if you read through this book, you'll find at least 2 great and notable miracles, not counting the interpretations of dreams, Brother Crane. But when you look in this book alone, you find how that God moved for His saints. But I want to look just a little further at where Daniel was actually at when an angel, that's what the Bible says, an angel was sent and shut the mouths of the lion. It doesn't take a multitude of angels. It only takes one when God's in it. And I thought, as I read through that never noticed that before, but just felt as if the Lord impressed upon my heart that was something that I'd not seen before. I don't know how many lions were in the den, Brother Crane, but I know all that it took was one messenger from God, and everything was going to be all right. When we began to look at this once again, I would like us to understand, and I'm not going to try to be repetitive of what someone preached on the other night, But I believe that it would do us good if we understood where Daniel was at in order to get into this den of lions. First, I believe that Daniel viewed God the way that he should. He understood that God was God. And sometimes I'm afraid that we lose our vision of who God really is. Once again, I'm not going to try to be redundant. I'm not going to stay on that very long. But I believe that Daniel understood God had answered his prayers before. God had given him interpretations of dreams before. He knew very well that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had come out of the fiery furnace. He understood fully that God was able to do a work in his life. And when the decision came, we all know that Daniel was full aware of not only what God could do, but I believe that he was full aware of what the king could do and what the king's commandments would mean unto him. We find that Daniel heard the decree that was made, yet he felt more about God, that he should still kneel down those 3 times a day. And I believe that if we begin to understand, once again, Daniel had such a vision of God, and he had such a desire to serve God. And so many times in the world that we live in today, I believe that somewhere between having a true view and vision of God and truly having a desire to serve God, we somehow lose a little bit of the connection that we need so desperately. And when, once again, when we look at what Daniel understood, the decree had been made. Nobody could worship anyone else outside of the king. Yet Daniel prayed. And 3 times a day, I don't know the exact time of the prayer for him, but I know that he swung the window open. He did not go into a reclusive situation, but instead he allowed everyone around him to know that he was going to serve God no matter what the circumstances. And he knelt down to pray. And this is where I felt God began to deal with me. When I look at this man by the name of Daniel, he goes into the den of lions. And we, of course, once again understand how the story ends. But let us remember that when Daniel went into the den of lions, he was not in a place to be in a celebration type mode. In fact, when he went down, I have to wonder what he thought as he was thrown in among those lions. Quite honestly, everybody in this building knows that God is able to heal. Amen? But let me ask you this. Do you have infirmities in your body at the moment that God hasn't healed? Or do you know others in your family and or loved ones, they haven't received their healing at this point in time? Now, mind you, Daniel understood that God could move. But when he was put into the den of lions, let's look from his viewpoint from a little bit of a moment here. Brother Crane, he was in a place of isolation. There was no one else that went in there with him in a human type and form. There was nobody else that had chose at this point in time to have also declared themselves that they were going to follow after God no matter what. He went in there alone. I'd like to preach a little bit right here. There are some of us that are here tonight, and though others may be around us, the truth of the matter is we are in a trial, and we feel isolated, and we feel all alone, and we don't really feel as if anyone else understands or knows the plight and or the tribulation that we're in. Oh, that is the vantage point of this man by the name of Daniel. He is in the den of lions. When he looks around, he doesn't see a brother Robert Williams, but he sees lions. I don't know how many were there once again, but I believe it was more than one. I believe it was more than 2. I don't know how
how many they'd put down there. But when he looks around, everything about him would say you've got a reason to fear. But Daniel had a hold of something. In the midst of his isolation, he had felt that God was going to move on his behalf. You see, Daniel was in a place not only of isolation, but he was in a place of punishment. The reason that he was put there is because he was willing to serve God. There are times and circumstances in our life we feel as if we've been isolated, and we feel as if we are being punished, but that's not what God is intending. But He's meant it for your good, no matter what the enemy says. He was in a place of punishment. And quite honestly, he was in a place of death. And he was in a place of defeat. That's just truthfulness. How many of us would be willing to go down to the Knoxville Zoo and jump in there with the lions and tigers? Any volunteers? Every now and then I read something in the paper or in the national news that speaks of a trainer and or one of those that are working in the zoological gardens, and they somehow get themselves separated from where they need to be, and the next thing you know, the food that they're carrying to them, they become the dinner for the lions or the tigers or the bears. I'm only trying to say that to say this. When Daniel went down, he was isolated, he was in a place of punishment, and there is, really, this is just my imagination, but I have to tell you that I believe that there were probably some bones of some other folks that had been there before. There were those leftovers where the lions had extinguished the lives of others. They had taken everything that they could get off from those bodies, and they left nothing there but the bones. I felt the Lord begin to deal with my heart about this. There are some people that are here tonight. I'm not preaching to who may be here tomorrow, but I'm going to preach to those that are here tonight. And the devil would like you to look around, and he would like you to think that you're isolated, and somehow you're being punished, and that you're in a place of defeat, and that you're in a place that you spiritually are going to lose your life. And when you look around, you see some that have been in the trial before, and somehow they lost their spirituality and their relationship with the Lord, and you are standing there and you're viewing things from a human point of view. But I'd like to take us a little further tonight. When I look at these situations, hey, I'm not just preaching about Daniel in the den of lions, but I'd like to remind you of a man by the name of David. He was not a great man of stature like Saul was. He was not a great man of stature like his brothers were. They were trained in warfare, and yet David was not. But when he went out to the battlefield and he saw Goliath, he had a hold of something different. He looked at things differently. I'd like to tell you tonight that if you can begin to view some things through the eyes of heaven instead of through our human eyes, it'll make all the difference in the world. There's not a battle too great. There's not, hey, when I started looking at this, truth of the matter is, almost every great and notable miracle that occurs in the Bible is against human nature. We all know that, but sometimes I don't think that we truly realize what a statement that is. Every time that you read of Daniel in the den of lions, human nature tells us that he's not coming back out again. You want to agree with that? When we read the story about that shepherd boy by the name of David, he goes out and he's going to fight a giant. Now he takes with him a sling and 5 smooth stones. Yet Goliath is a man of war. He had those that he had armor bearers. He had people that basically took the spear to the battle for him and with him. But when we read about David, he's just a small shepherd boy. Once again, human nature tells me that that's not going to be much of a fight. I'm going to get somewhere here in just a little bit. Joseph was a great man of God. But if you ask me, the prison was sure good enough to take all the dreams that young man had ever had and banish them forever from him. But something in their lives made such a difference. I hope I can preach for just a little while longer right here. Those 3 Hebrew children that I spoke of a little bit earlier, think about it for just a moment. The fire was so hot that the ones that had bound them up and cast them into that fiery furnace perished because of the heat of that moment. Now imagine with me, if you could, what the king must have thought when he looked into the fiery furnace and when he saw those 3 Hebrew children walking around. And he saw not only them, but he saw it was not an angel of the Lord at that time, but it was one that was the Son of God, from everything that we can read there. And the only reason that I'm bringing all of these up, I look at the children of Israel as they're fleeing Pharaoh and his army. Can you imagine the panic that began to set into that camp when they came to the Red Sea? Can you imagine as they began to look behind them? And once again, I want you to understand that if we were to look at that in the natural eye, it would all be seeming to us as lost. But if we could begin to look at it once again from the view of heaven, then we would know that God is working for us, and He's working in us, and He's working through us, so that He can do a great and mighty thing. The truth of the matter is, I've read these to you tonight, and I felt that there is one word that I needed to get to, and that word is simply this. There is victory when we begin to see what God's wanting to do. Oh, I'd like to preach right here for a while. I believe too many of us feel that pulling. We feel that pulling downward. We feel as if the enemy would like us to look down and upon the earth. And yes, I understand that when we look into the Bible, I know that the waves of this ocean that is on the Atlantic side, I know that those waves are controlled by 2 things. It is by 2 bodies. One is earthly, and that is the gravitational pull of the earth. But the other is heavenly, and that is the moon. I'd like to tell you tonight that we are not controlled by the earthly things, by the human nature, but if we're serving God in holiness and we're trying to do our dead level best for Him, then He's going to move for us in ways that we can't fathom. Instead of being defeated, I don't believe there should be a defeated Christian, but there have been times that I felt as if I was losing the battle. But thank God, when He began to move, He turned it all around, and it made victory even sweeter, because I knew that within myself I could not have overcome. It is interesting to me, and too many times I won't embarrass my boys too bad right now, but they've been mowing some yards. And I made a comment today that I probably shouldn't have made. As a father, it's easy to get frustrated, Brother Crane. Dogs may be man's best friend. They really are, but a carpenter loves his tools. The other day when they were putting the mower back up, they didn't see that T-square that was there. And I pulled that thing out from under that mower today. It was no longer a T-square, it was a T-curve. Then I found something else under that had been crushed. And I made a comment. And once again, I'm not trying to embarrass them whatsoever. And I could tell that it hit home after I made it. And I'll stand here tonight and say I'm sorry for what came out. One in particular will know that I shouldn't have said it in the way that I said it. I should have said it differently. And I hope that I can say this in the right way. The reason that many of us do not get the help that we need from the Lord is two-part. We don't ask, and we're too immature to accept what He's going to tell us. The other night I kind of looked down over the congregation and I asked a question. I asked the question at the start of a message, how many people came here to be disappointed tonight? Believe it or not, someone never listened to what I was saying until after I got the disappointed part out. Their hand went up and then they put it down real quick. They realized right in the middle of what they were doing, they wanted to be one of the first ones to throw the hand up, and then they realized. So I want you to think carefully of what I'm about to say. How many of us volunteered to go into the den of lions? How many of us want to be the one that goes into the fiery furnace? How many of us want to hear the footsteps of the enemy behind us, seeming as if there's no place to go forward and that we're about to be tracked down? That's right, Brother Crane. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. The only way that we're ever going to have victories in our lives or if we have trials. But who wants to volunteer for the trial? Not very many of us do. But I'd like us to serve notice on the enemy tonight that if there's a trial that we're going to go through, we're not going to be alone. And if there's a place, God dealt with me about this message, and I believe that I spend too much time assessing what is going on around me. Too many times I feel like I'm the guy that's in the den of lions, and I'm looking around and I see the bodies of those that didn't make it. I see the remains of the ones that lost the battle. God doesn't want us to look around at the ones that have lost the battle and or given up the fight. But what He wants us to do is go over to Hebrews chapter number 11 and begin to read. And we began to read of those men and women that all that it took, Brother Crane, is faith. That's all that it takes. Tonight I feel like that I'm preaching to some of us. We have become weary in the battle. We've become to the point to where we're ready to throw in the towel. Years ago, I would watch boxing matches of all the things to be able to watch. Two guys hitting each other upside the head that really makes no sense whatsoever. It just doesn't. It amazed me. But you know, if one of those fighters got to hitting the other too many times and too hard, that corner would be willing to throw in the towel. There have been times that I've seen those guys, they were getting beaten so badly, their corner would throw in the towel, and they would go back to the corner, and they'd be mad at the guys who were trying to help them get out of the situation that they were in. I've seen that. And the only reason that I'm even using that analogy tonight is this. There is no time for a Christian to throw in the towel. Because we have one that has never lost a battle. He's never lost one. Now others may take themselves out of His hand and out of His grip, but He's never lost one. Not one. And I can tell you this right now, that old preacher, I don't even know who said it, Brother Crane, you may know, but he had made the comment that if you can stand the pull, He'll pull you out of it. You remember who said that? I can tell you this, we have a God that is greater than any enemy that we will ever face. We have a God that is greater than any trial that we'll ever face. And if we'll put our trust and confidence in Him, He'll bring us through, He'll bring us out, and we can shout the victory on the other side. Now, I don't know about you, but I can see by the way that we read here in Daniel chapter number 6, I believe that the King Darius here, had already made it a decree, yes. But notice with me in verse 16, now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God whom thou servest continually, He will deliver thee. That's before He ever put him in the den of lions. He already knew that Daniel had such a relationship with a true God, that God was going to bring him out. But notice with me, the king then went back to the palace. We're not told what Daniel did that night, but I believe he slept. I just think that he did. I think that he was about like Peter that we read about in the New Testament. I believe that Peter was found asleep. And when we read that, and the angel had to awaken him, he had such a peace about him, brother, night that he did not fret and he did not worry. And I believe that's where Daniel was at, whereas in the king's palace there was great concern. And the king went there early in the morning, Brother Crane, and he leaned down over that and basically asked the question, Daniel, the God that you serve, was He able to deliver you? Can you imagine how much delight it must have been for Daniel standing down in that den of lions to look up and say, O King, live forever. And God has sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions. Can you imagine how that was such a testimony? I want to tell you something tonight. God would like to take your den of lions that you're in right now, and the things that you're doubting, and the things that you're wondering about, and He'd like to exchange that for a victory and for a testimony that you could look around at others and say, I don't know how He did it, but He brought me through. I don't know exactly why He did it, but He brought me out. I don't know exactly why, but I'm going to testify about it everywhere that I go. Can you imagine what it must have been like when Daniel walked out and those others looked at him? They said he was thrown in the den of lions. He should not be alive, but there he is. God protected him. Wouldn't it be great for a household of people, a house full of people, to understand that God did it again? That God, that He came by, Brother Crane, and He delivered once again. As someone comes to the music tonight, stand to your feet if you would. Oh. So many times I feel as if we look at these stories, and since we know the ending at the beginning, we just they don't really excite us the way that they need to. I'm guilty. But I want you to know something. You may be in the middle of your trial tonight, and you may wonder why. And your viewpoint may not be when it needs to be. But God wants to take the viewpoint. Every one of these that I preached about, they were on the verge of defeat. But the truth of the matter is, they were on the verge of victory. Tonight, I'd like to encourage you. You're not on the verge of defeat, but you're on the edge of a victory in your life. God's moving. God's doing. He